So, after a random coin flip, we will begin with the dirty break. So, Ed, to you.
All right.
You have 5 minutes.
Hello, everybody. It seems at the heart of this issue lies the core truth that at some point the socialist movement needs to come together into a more cohesive political formation. Whether at this time that formation will be a political party or some other formation of politics has yet to be determined. And even if it is, a political party that is the necessary form at this time, when and how to do it is still at issue. Now, I can understand the hesitation towards continuing to associate ourselves with the Democratic Party. Their recent actions with firm control of both legislative houses and the executive branch to either merely capitulate to reactionary forces or to embark on self-directed programs of austerity show them to be no friend of the plight of the working class, and all too eager to answer to the demands of capital. To a certain extent, any electoral victory we achieve under their auspices provides additional political cover for them to claim the mantle of progressive when they are, in fact, nothing of the sort. But as many holes as I might poke in their in the democratic doctrines, they are, in a way, correct on one aspect of politics, and that is the necessity of compromise. Now, we don't need to compromise to the extent that the Democratic Party is eager to return to the bargaining table again and again, but at times there are political necessities that demand trade-offs. As things stand right now, the Democratic Party has the elements that we currently lack, namely ballot line access and campaign infrastructure. By continuing our sort of insurgency within them as part of the dirty break strategy, we can have access to both these critical elements of infrastructure without having to compromise too much in our own values in terms of a short-term tactical maneuver. Access to a ballot line is not, as you might think, dependent on party leadership to determine. Any candidate who collects a sufficient number of signatures from an enrolled from members of a given party can run as a candidate on that ballot line. Running as a Democrat does not make us beholden to DNC discipline. And those candidates we've run thus far have run on that ballot line, and they're still, reprimanded by DNC higher ups, and they have largely resisted this discipline. Further, campaigning in traditionally Democratic aligned party spaces gives our candidates some infrastructure to organize around. This does not necessarily mean begging and pleading to Democratic voters, but literal technical infrastructure. DSA candidates couldn't afford to out-organize other Democratic candidates without the backing of the small sum donations that we can collect through the Act Blue infrastructure for donation processing. Further, we need access to voter activation network databases, which we can do so through the Democratic Party infrastructure we have access to while working within the party locally. I skipped a line here. Though our tepid dealings with the DNC have proven our ability to access these pieces of infrastructure without compromising our core values as socialists. And we can continue to do so until we have built the infrastructure ourselves. This is a short-term tactic that we need to undertake until we've built that infrastructure. The bottom line is we don't have that infrastructure now. It is critical to our political objectives. And because we don't have that infrastructure, we need to continue within the Democratic Party while we build that infrastructure without. Thank you. I see the rest of my time.
Thank you, Ed. Just two quick notes. One, Ed, you might want to turn your phone on silent because it seems to keep buzzing. Um, and for the both debaters, I'm going to be giving you time checks in the chat. So just please keep your eye on it. Bruce, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Awesome, thanks. So arguing for a clean break is about the need for socialists to play an active role in exposing the crisis of capitalism. And part of that involves attacking the capitalist two-party system and helping to lay the foundation for a new workers' party. So we need to ask what defines success under the Democratic Party line. There's an argument in DSA that DSA is winning because many of its endorsed candidates have won elections and the organization has grown rapidly. And this is, of course, very exciting. As socialists continuing to work in the Democratic Party, though, I think we've still yet to achieve the material success in the only way that should matter to socialists, which is winning concrete victories for working people and advancing the class struggle. So Bernie's runs within the Democratic Party furthered radicalization in an awesome and important way, but his campaigns also played a contradictory role in sowing illusions in the reformability of the Democrats. So the squad has also completely failed to take on Biden and Pelosi and the corporate wing of their party. And they also don't have any accountability to DSA or any other socialist organization. And I think even more importantly, the squad has no accountability to the working class because so far they've refused to use their elected seats to build grassroots movements. And instead they're really relying on backroom deals and the false illusion that socialism can be won through reforms or electing the right people. So these are inevitable pressures that come down on people who run within the Democratic Party, and they will continue to do so. I think what this has done is created a gray area in the party where workers have no idea who is on their side, and we need to ask ourselves, are we reaching the working class most effectively by continuing to run as Democrats? So what are some of the problems with the dirty break? It's just unclear when this will ever happen. Like, is anyone actually preparing the ground for an actual break? In big Democratic controlled cities where there are nonpartisan races, there are some DSA candidates that are still running as Democrats. Even locally here in Somerville, 6 out of 7 city council candidates are running as Democrats when there is no need to, as there isn't even a concern about the spoiler effect. So a logical dirty break question is, if we define success purely by electoral wins on the Democratic ballot line, it leads to the question, why would we break anyway? And to that end, many past proponents of the dirty break, like Eric Blanc, are abandoning it and moving towards a realignment strategy of changing the Democratic Party from within. Now, this incrementalism, this slow accumulation of power within the party, it's totally at odds with the timeline of the climate crisis, which is already ravaging sections of the globe and will only get worse. I think running as a Democrat clouds the question of class independence and the need for that break from them in the future. Whereas running as an independent is a very useful mechanism through which to demonstrate to people our message about the Democratic Party, which I think a lot of us agree on. It's not good enough. It's not our party. We want to build something new. So looking forward, recent polls have shown that a record high of 62% of people say we need a new party. Now, not to be cliche, but there is a serious, if you build it, they will come potential here. But DSA, as the leading socialist organization in the country, needs to go on the offensive to do so. Now, I want to be clear that a clean break position at this moment isn't to provide concrete steps to getting a viable electoral ballot off the ground. As Resolution 38 to the National Convention says, there is no singular strategic agreement on the particulars of how an independent party may be formed, but that DSA should work towards building working class power and spreading socialist ideas across the country. What we need in DSA is political buy-in to move away from the Democratic Party completely by being the leading voice for workers who are the fundamental agent of change under capitalism. We have nearly 100,000 members, and we can help to provide a real independent left alternative. Yes, it will be an extremely hard obstacle to overcome the capitalist two-party system, but that doesn't mean we don't do it, because if we can't overcome a ballot line, how can we defeat capitalism? One way we can do this is to push this message in our labor work, since so many unions have a tight and rotten relationship to the Democratic Party. I think Eve's campaign locally here is a great start. We should not be shy about strongly pointing to their independence from the Democrats. There's also concrete lessons to learn from Shama Sawant's independent city council seat in Seattle, where she's the only independent amongst a government filled with Democrats. This allows her to go into open war versus the Democrats when they are subservient to capital. And that draws very clear lines between the ruling class and the working class. So there's no confusion about where an independent socialist stands. So in my last 10 seconds, I'll just say socialists need to provide active leadership to the wider working class. A strong lead provided by socialists can expedite developments in consciousness and the class struggle. So sitting back and waiting for consciousness to improve won't do that. The time to act is now. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. So Ed, you're going to have 5 minutes for an initial response, and then Bruce, you will get 5 minutes for your own response. You can use those 5 minutes how you like, but just note that there will be a question section afterwards where we can dive more deeply into some of the particulars. So Ed, you have 5 minutes.
Yes. To Bruce's fairly well argued point, running candidates as independents can help to increase the contradictions between sort of the bourgeoisie party or sort of the at least non-aligned with the working class party that the Democrats present themselves to now in certain cases. I do not doubt that the independent run of the Sawant campaign and our slate out in Somerville, drawing sharp distinctions between ourselves and the Democratic Party is anything but a good thing. But, as Bruce pointed out, those candidates in Somerville are running as Democrats. And the important thing is, I agree as well, to draw those distinctions. But it's possible that the best way, it is better to draw out those distinctions from within the party. In this early phase of sort of building our political power, we won't have all that many socialist electeds in our orbit. We won't get all too many socialists in office with any considerable power. So the best use of their time and tactics is to agitate, is to call out the injustices, to lay bare sort of the hypocrisies and where different where our means of politics differs from business as usual. We see amongst the the squad and the like in Congress have been somewhat tepid in their bringing about the socialist vision. What has been made clear is that the Democrat power structure very much opposes them and seeks to delineate, no, this is not how we do it. This is not democracy. If we were to switch to a third party, the Democrats are going to, play the same line that they have with the Greens and other independents, that, this is splitting the vote, that we both want the same thing and, we should reconcile. By playing on their own terms, like playing on their home ground, they have to talk about how they differ and why we have to and draw out those distinctions that Bruce was talking about. By being an insurgent force, by agitating within the party, those fault lines, those ruptures in the political sphere become all the more clear because they're fighting over the same resources. If the Democrats, could safely have us outside of the party, then there's not so much to worry about. If we are eating their lunch, if we are taking their infrastructure and using it to our own ends, then they have to explain why they don't want us in there using their things. Not that independent parties and actions cannot do that also, but it really brings it home and forces them on the back foot to have these contests within the party for the time being. Eventually, the political situation will build to a point where we do have the infrastructure and we will have sufficient number of socialist candidates in office in positions to do things that we can move beyond pure agitation. But in the early days following, the initial Bernie campaign and the arrival of the squad, the preeminent tactic we need to do now to awaken people to the possibilities of socialism is agitation while in office. And the best place to do that agitation is in the Democrats' own backyard, to highlight how they are not the progressives they claim to be, and to explain how socialism differs from business as usual. I'm sorry, they're doing construction outside my house just right now, but I've gotten the point I wanted to make. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ed. Bruce, you have 5 minutes for your opening response.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I mean, I think, some of the things that I'm seeing, in this current wave of the squad and progressives or socialists using the Democratic Party line. So, I agree. Like, if you run as a Democrat, that does not make you beholden to DNC discipline. But from my perspective, it seems that, so let's say AOC said clearly that in another country, say whatever, a Western European country, her and Biden shouldn't be in the same party, which I think we all agree with. But that's not the situation here in the US. We only have these two parties and they're both capitalist parties. Unfortunately, it seems like the method of politics that Biden uses and AOC are very similar. Like, I think the most exciting thing AOC ever did was sit in on Nancy Pelosi's office with, excited youth, the Sunrise Movement, people willing to take a action-based, approach. So getting out in the streets and agitating. And she got a lot of positive press for that. But since then, I would say a lot of her politics, and similar with the squad, is just, trying to do these backroom deals, which have been very unsuccessful, tweeting that really haven't gotten a lot done. So, when we say running as a Democrat doesn't make you beholden to DNC discipline, I have to question that, because part of me wonders if they're just, concerned about how they will look to, the corporate wing of the party. And I feel like Nancy Pelosi has kind of done a pretty good job of keeping them in line and doing things her way. I don't want to make this whole response about the squad, but I just feel like that is the most visible, example that we have right now. What I think, being independent of the Democrats immediately allows you to do is use this movement building approach. And Eve, I'm going to call out Eve again. They talk very clearly about, movement building in their campaign literature, and they shouldn't have to worry about that pressure from the Democratic Party, because they're not in it, they're not running in it. The other thing I think is just the abstract concept of this, eventually, or when we gain enough power. To me, it's just very unclear when that's going to be, because the Democratic Party, as it exists right now, is kind of this black hole that, if we look at the the uprisings last year with BLM, they kind of absorbed a lot of that energy by saying, vote for us and then we'll fix the situation or whatever in the US. But I mean, we're seeing the inverse of that right now, right? Like a lot of the Democrats are now trying to increase police budgets, and all that energy has been absorbed into their party structures and kind of left that movement. I believe as a Marxist, I think that will it will come back at a higher level at some point. But I mean, we should be the ones pointing out, the contradictions at the heart of the party and what they did with the incredible energy that was in the streets last summer. Also, like with that timeline, what's going to happen in the next couple elections? The 2022 midterms are down the road. The 2024 elections for president are down the road. There's probably going to be some type of reaction to what the Democrats have done in office so far. And then you're forced with the party, trying even harder to like be cohesive and saying, you know, like we saw for the Trump versus Biden election, where towards the end, the squad really just said, get out, vote blue, you know, get Trump out, lesser evilism, which, you know, is an argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think we're going to see that come back very soon in 2022 and 2024. And then you've completely lost the plot about being able to agitate from within the party, because, I mean, Nancy Pelosi isn't going to have that. So yeah, I mean, I would say, I think at the very least, we need to lead from the front in these big cities where DSA is big in, and we don't have to worry about spoiler effects of Republicans. We can, you know, we can run as independents. There shouldn't be any concern there, at least at this moment. And I think we need to do it sooner than later. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. So we're now going to pivot into our questions section. If anyone in the audience has a question that they would like asked, they can send it to me, to the host of the Zoom meeting. We do have a number of prepared questions, so no promise that we'll be able to get to audience questions or to all of them. To begin with, just to establish the format of this section, a question will be asked, and each debater will have 2.5 minutes to answer the question or to respond to the other person. Some questions will be general, some questions will be more pointed. We're going to begin actually with a pointed question. Bruce, a number of times you've mentioned that people like AOC and the rest of the squad, their method of change seems to consist of backroom deals and that they aren't held accountable. Given that the state of the movement exists as it does, how would having an independent party hold such politicians more accountable? And why can't that same accountability be done through the same methods, but on the Democratic ballot line? You have 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think a lot of this stems just from this I keep coming back to the fact that the Democratic Party is a capitalist party. And I don't mean to keep repeating that, but like it makes it, and I know there's an argument that some people have that it's just a ballot line, but I don't necessarily buy that, because there are so many institutions and functions that make up the Democratic Party that are beholden to capital, that it makes it very hard for working class people to understand. Like there's this gray area, right, where a lot of people just vote based on the ticket they see, what you run on. They see Democrat, and right now, you know, with, I think, you know, Ed said it too, I think it's very clear with all the functions of government in their hand, they're still subservient to capital. So how, you know, I ultimately think this comes down to the pressures of the office, that when you run as a Democrat, you get hit with this. It becomes so strong that it gives even socialists who run under the ballot line pause about, and they're pulled between two different sides, between, you know, maybe the reformism or the whatever, lesser evilism or whatever of the corporate side, and then of being accountable to the working class on the other side. And as a Marxist, I believe that you can't live in that gray area. You have to choose a side. There's either the ruling class or the working class. And I think being an independent, that removes all those pressures from the top down to act accordingly, however that may be. But it's usually not in the best interest of workers. And yeah, I just think that there's different pressures on candidates or elected officials, whether they're under a Democrat where the pressure's strong versus an independent where they don't have to worry about that, you know, kind of big D looking over your shoulder, big Democratic Party looking over your shoulder.
Thank you. Ed, you have 2.5 minutes to respond.
Yeah. The thing of it is, it's not necessarily, while there are in any political party, systems and methods of discipline built in, especially in like a bourgeoisie capitalist party like the Democrats, to keep candidates that run either through or with the party beholden to the interests that the party was built to serve. Those pressures exist even outside the structure of a party. As Bruce said, later on down the line, in response to the socialist wave, forces of reaction are going to come in. They're going to come in at us regardless of whether we are within, whether we have an independent party or no. And the point, one of the particulars about, the ballot line being open to any who, wish to make use of it, is that cuts both ways. There's nothing to prevent, moneyed interest candidates that support the interests of capital to coming on and collecting enough signatures to run on whatever independent third party that we happen to create. And these pressures that Bruce keeps referring to that, are moving socialist, putatively socialist candidates such as the Squad to act against socialist interests. Those forces are not necessarily inherent to the party, but rather because Democrats have the infrastructure built into their party that they are using to affect, this pressure. The only real defense against that is not leaving the party entirely, but building these structures of building these infrastructures and building a cohesive base to make sure that these pressures cannot be put on, regardless of your position politically or what political formation you are in.
Thank you, Ed. That actually transitions well into our next question, which is for you. You've mentioned at the end there, and as well in your opening statements, the necessity of building up a base and how using the democratic infrastructure will be helpful for that. But doesn't that only give us access to those who are already committed to the Democratic Party? And can't we build up a base through our own work, whether that be independent canvassing or labor work or housing work or any of the other work that we do as DSA? You have 2.5 minutes.
Yes. I don't want to fall into the fallacy that, well, electoral work is the biggest, most splashy, where all the press is at, that it is the totality of what we do. We're still going out there and doing mutual aid work. We're doing labor organizing. We're doing tenant organizing, demonstrating, doing all manner of political advocacy as democratic socialists. And just because our candidates are running on a Democratic Party line, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those other things we're doing that is not electoral work is being done under the auspices of, the Democratic Party. Just running under their line does not translate into like the larger political sphere of our activity being co-opted, into the Democrats. So while essentially electoral work is something of a dodge, it's to create those conditions of agitation I was talking about earlier. If we can win, material advantages or relieve some pressures from working class people through, policies we can affect, so much better. But I don't know that we're ever going to sort of elect into office a regime of, fully automated luxury gay space communism, however much I dearly wish it were so. What we are going to do is we're going to create, political space to do more of the groundwork that is disassociated from the Democratic Party. sort of our electoral efforts in and through the Democrats are something of a sacrifice to the political necessity of having to work within that realm. I think that's the extent of it. It's just one aspect of many of our political work.
Thank you, Ed. Bruce, you have 2.5 minutes to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important question because it, I think sometimes when we talk about this new party question, it's always focused on electoral work, and I definitely agree that electoralism isn't the only avenue to push this forward. As I said in my introduction, I think labor work, it's very important that we draw clear lines between us and the Democratic Party. I think that the Democratic Party, for going on many decades now, has played a horrible role in labor organizing, again, existing in this compromise situation where, as socialists, we should understand there isn't the contradictions of capitalism. There's the interest of the worker and the interest of the capitalist are antithetical to each other. And living in the middle is just, during quote unquote good times is possible, but it's not going to last forever. And I think as we see these heightened contradictions, especially since the 2008 crisis, where things really have never gotten back on track for workers under neoliberalism, we need to use that to continue to expose it to workers. And I think, this 62% statistic is so revealing to me that, I think people have rightly pointed out, the usage of the VAN software only limits us to people who are registered Democratic voters. What about all these people that, we're missing knocking on their doors because they're not, registered as Democrats, or they're not in the software? We want to find ways to reach them. And yeah, I think one of the whole reasons for this for this argument is to take this message into all our work, into housing work, labor work, all the work we do, and continue to point out, the fact that this party can't be reformed, and that the sooner we break from it, the better. So yeah, I'm running out of time, but stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. So this next question is more general. You both have touched upon the notion that other work, whether in labor, in housing, mutual aid, etc., is important for building up a socialist movement. The question then is, how does electoral work fit into that broader strategy? And more specifically, what is the purpose or the role of getting socialists elected? Bruce, we're going to start with you. You have 2.5 minutes.
It's to expose the impossibility of reforming capitalism through the ruling class's own institutions, right? We can elect people into office that can push for, material gains for workers. But there's always going to be a limit on that, right? And we need to use electoral office to expose those limits so people begin to understand that just electing the right people who go off to Congress or go into their city councils and, argue for the good things we want workers to have is there, only so much can be won through that. And by showing working people that, it makes them realize that they are the actual agents of change. The things that Shama Sawant, I'm going to refer to her again, has won in Seattle, they've all been won on the back of movements like the Tax Amazon movement, the $15 an hour minimum wage. Those were all done with mass mobilizations of people continuing to come out in force. The workers are the majority under capitalism, but the ruling class has control of all the institutions. So inevitably, if we elect enough people, I think we've all seen, if we start to like, I think even with the Bernie campaign, as Bernie started to get closer and closer, the mechanisms of him winning the nomination, Obama, they all rallied around what they were able to do to steal the nomination from him. And we're seeing in Buffalo now, the ruling class is gonna, what are they? I forget what it was, but they're looking for ways to basically usurp the power of the mayor. So there's very stated limits to what can be done for workers under capitalist or ruling class institutions. We want to get socialists in there, independent socialists, to expose those limits and build a movement on the back of it.
All right, thank you, Bruce. Ed, same question to you. How does electoral work fit into a larger socialist strategy? And more specifically, what is the role of getting socialists elected?
All right. Well, I'm rather pleased with this question because it allows me at the same time to answer a question that Bruce posed. How are we going to reach those other people who are not Democrats? And the answer is through our electoral work, by and large. I mean, we're still going to use, these other forms, direct action, mutual aid and things like that. That'll bring some people in, but political activity is sort of, as Lenin said, the lightning rod of, political organizing. It gets the interest of the common person. It lets you know where you are. It lets them know where you are and where you stand. So long as we're not leading off all of our campaign rallies with like, hi, I'm Eugene Debs too. And by the way, I'm a Democrat. Let me say that first and foremost. Then I think we can, win people over to the virtues of socialism through our political campaigning, outline a political vision of a socialist future through our political work. That is the main purpose of our socialist electoral efforts. And if running on a Democratic Party line in the short term gets us out there, gets the message out there quicker and faster, and with us having to do less work to get on ballot lines and the like, so much the better. And while the Democratic Party is assuredly a bourgeoisie working class capital institution, like the entire edifice of the US government is the same thing. Even if we were to extricate ourselves from that, we'd still be working within the capitalist system of the Congress and the executive branch, all checks and balances to make sure that the white landowning hegemony gets to keep its grasp on power. Just exiting the Democratic Party doesn't get us away from that in and of itself.
Thank you. So I'm going to apologize to those who sent questions in, but unfortunately we have to keep moving along. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have closing statements. Bruce, we're going to start with you. You will have 3 minutes to make closing statements. You can respond to any points that have been made over the course of the debate. You can raise new points if you'd like. And then we'll go to Ed. You have 3 minutes, Bruce.
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, I think this has been a great discussion thus far. I'm glad for the opportunity to do it. I think it's just important that I, reiterate that we don't have the ready-made steps at this point to get a viable electoral ballot line out there, right? Like this is a political exercise within DSA, and then ideally, or at the same time, reaching out to working class people who are turning away from what they're seeing the Democratic Party do. There is a wide open space on the left for leadership that, in my opinion, only an independent socialist can provide at this point. I think we need to use the fact that DSA is the leading socialist organization in the US by a country mile at this point. And there's so many different ways that we've talked about today that we can get this message out there, that it's time to break away from the Democrats. I think they're, again, I'm gonna cite the 62% statistic. We should link up with the people who are looking for a left alternative, which can be, especially the exploited people in this country, youth, LGBTQ, women, people of color. Like, they clearly still don't have a place in the Democratic Party. It's very confusing for working class people to figure out who is acting in their best interests. I think the dirty break has just been thus far. I think it's, at one time it was the correct position to take, but given where we are now in the updated conditions, given what we've seen with COVID, and especially after COVID, and the serious failures by people who are supposedly not part of the corporate wing of the Democratic Party to actually fight for things like Medicare for all. And now that it's 119 degrees in Portland and Seattle, not really fighting for the correct approach to climate change. Like, we've exhausted this dirty break strategy. Like, I don't think we have much time left to just say at some point in the future, when we've built enough power, we can actually do the break. Like, I think we need to start putting this message forward now at this time, as DSA has 100,000 members, and hopefully continues to grow. So I had 3 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Ed, your closing statement. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with Bruce to the point that our positions differ only in a matter of time. The ongoing strategy of dirty break made sense to him up to a point, and honestly, personally, I'm entirely sick of the Democrats too. We don't need them. There's no fondness in my heart for them. My advocacy for a dirty break is essentially because splitting off clean would be too kind to them, by agitating within their political realm, by co-opting their resources, such as has happened with the Las Vegas chapter of DSA taking over the state leadership of the Democratic Party of Nevada, and just generally causing them headaches where they have to take their ball and go home, as they have in Buffalo, is doing more of the work to draw out those contradictions and prepare us for that eventual split. To answer sort of the question swirling around, both when and how will we know when we've built this power? When will we know we're ready? I, again, have no ready-made answer. There's no divine Gnosticism in the holy books of Lenin or Marx or anything like that says, oh yes, in the 2022 after the primaries, that's the time to go. The way we find that out is through the praxis of doing the organizing of electoral work. We build that base that we need. We build the infrastructure that we need through the process of doing this electoral work. We can build our own, infrastructure of our own voter databases, and get our own donor processing things set up to line up our donors through campaigns as they exist now within the Democratic Party. We're going to have to do the work out in the field right now, and as things stand, the way that it's being done is through the party, through the Democratic Party line, when and where we shift is going to be based off of how, the lessons we learn from the campaigning that we're doing now. So, if the lessons we learned from that campaigning is that, we're ready, we've built that power, then yes, let us lead. But, having done some of that campaigning myself, I don't think we're there yet. I'm hoping we're very close to having built it. But to build that power, we need to use that infrastructure as it exists now.
All right, thank you, Ed. And thank you both of both of our debaters. I'm going to